Hi, guys, and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. I am joined by Bob. No, I'm kidding. It's my awesome co-host, Amy Hollenkamp, RD, in the house.
Hey,
And I
everybody.
am Nikki. I always forget to say my name. But today we are talking about a nutrient that's near and dear to everyone's heart because we all need it, iron, as it relates to the gut. And again, this is a two-way street where honestly, you'd be hard pressed to heal your gut if you don't have enough iron and you're walking around anemic all day. But also, if your gut is a train wreck, you might not be absorbing enough iron because of your gut. So, Amy, with that, I will kick the ball over to you. Hello, my dear, and let's get right into iron. Where do you want to begin?
Yeah, I think with iron, where we should probably begin is I just want to talk a little bit about like what iron does in the body, I guess.
Mhm. Yep.
So I think the main thing that we think about with iron is like oxygen transportation in the body. It helps your cells get oxygen, which is really important.
Big
Critically,
deal.
right, a big deal. And there's other things that we can deep dive into on tasks that iron does as well, but that's probably the biggest one. And usually the symptoms of iron deficiency are labeled as anemia, and there's different types of anemia, which can be a little bit confusing,
Mhm.
where you can have deficiencies in B12 and folate, and those can lead to a little bit different manifestation of anemia, but similar symptoms. But iron deficiency anemia tends to come with symptoms like shortness of breath, low energy, um, dizziness, those types of symptoms. Would you add anything else in particular, Nikki?
Yeah, like an overall feeling of weakness or like your
Yeah.
body can't cope with normal tasks. Like I remember when my mom was really low on iron, just like going upstairs, she had to stop like four times going up a normal flight of stairs
Yeah, it's like
and winded.
yeah, like lethargy, malaise. Like those are the types of words that kind of come to my head. But I think it's something that there's usually so much going on probably with the clients that we work with where there's a lot of gut stuff happening, and there's a lot of strategies being looked at, and sometimes iron goes under the radar from my standpoint. Like, low energy can be blamed on just SIBO often, or
Hmm.
blamed on a lot of other things like thyroid issues, um, or just runaway stress. So it can just be something that can go under the radar, and I definitely see it's very prevalent in the population that I work with. We were talking before we jumped on air, like I'd probably say like probably 80% of the clients that I work with have iron deficiency of some sort. Maybe it's
Yeah.
not extreme, but a lot of people I'm seeing ferritin like 10 to at 10, which is low.
Yeah.
And in a lot of times, which is interesting to me, and you can let me know if you've had a similar experience, but a lot of docs don't really flag it either. Like they might be like, oh, your iron's low, but unless it's like below 11, I think might be the reference range, which is another area we should probably discuss, is the reference
Hmm.
range in the conventional space. But a lot of docs will be like, oh yeah, your iron's a little low, but like they're not really intervening when I feel like intervention's probably necessary.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it definitely tends to be low in the clients that I work with, and it's just a tricky nutrient to replenish. I've found as well. If you're using different forms of iron, which we might get into, it,
Hmm.
it tends to be a little bit more helpful when there's gut issues, because iron supplementation can also cause symptoms. So
Yeah.
that's what makes it a little bit tricky, is if you have this lower um, if you're in a lower iron state, replenishing the iron can be a little tricky when you have gut issues. So that's kind of the gist, or like a good summary, I'd say, of what I see when working with people. Tell me kind of your experience with iron deficiency and anemia with your patients.
Yeah, I think a lot of things are going to be echoed from what you said. It's often missed in part because the lab reference ranges are so absurd
Right.
that, like, I mean, I just, not last week, but the week before, I think I had a patient where the LabCorp reference range for hemoglobin, as an example, goes down to 11.1, and she was at 11.2. And I was like, ugh. Like,
Yeah.
that's real close to them flagging you as anemic. And I have this conversation with most of my patients where, now this is true of functional labs to an extent, but it's much more something to have on the radar with things like Quest and LabCorp and, like run-of-the-mill routine conventional lab testing companies. They're giving you what they call their reference interval. They don't use the word normal. They don't use the word ideal. It's not ideal human physiology. That's just their reference interval. And mostly they're basing that off of a big fat bell curve analysis. And they're plotting everybody they've ever tested. And they're saying, yeah, as long as you're like right here in the middle with everybody else, you're probably A-okay. But I always joke with patients, I like gesture to the door. I'm like, have you met anybody ever? Like, everybody has an autoimmune disease, heart disease, high cholesterol, diabetes, cancer. Like, you don't want to be like them. And I love myself included. Like, you don't want to base your like goal setting off of that. You want to be more iron replete than normal people in America. And like, you want to have less inflammation than normal people in America, right? So like, there's some nuance to that, but iron deficiency and anemia just broadly get really underdiagnosed because the lab reference ranges for LabCorp and Quest are absolute rubbish. And that's what doctors are going off of. So I've seen people very frequently where it comes in and it's like borderline or even worse. I've seen a lot of cases where like, say, using that number I threw out there, like hemoglobin, say hemoglobin is like 10.8. And the doctor sees it, they're like, well, yeah, but it's like barely abnormal. It's like, well, what the heck? And I've seen this with other labs too, like TSH, like, it's kind of like this attitude of like, call me when your TSH goes above 10. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
What's the point of having these ranges? Because a lot of doctors then ignore the ranges, which already are shit themselves. So yeah, I see it pretty commonly. I would say, I think 80% might be a little high for my group of folk. I think probably 50% are iron deficient in some way, shape, or form. I also see high ferritin as a marker of inflammation fairly frequently amongst my patients. I would say that's probably 20%. And then maybe 20 or 30% of people have normal iron, normal ferritin. Everything kind of checks out A-okay in that regard. But it's very, very common though.
Yeah. And I will say too, I've definitely seen the high ferritin as well. And I know in the conventional space, we learn that as like the anemia of chronic disease. That's kind of how it was referred to us in dietetic school. And essentially what's happening with that is iron's a pro-oxidant. So if there's a lot of inflammation, your body is trying to help control inflammation by like putting iron into the storage form. Yeah. But then a lot of times you'll still have like almost anemia type symptoms because there's not enough iron sitting around in the blood. So it's really weird. It's a weird thing when iron gets a little bit elevated, but that might be, again, something we touch on a little bit too. Like there's some genetics that could be at play as well there. Yeah. With things like hemochromatosis. Is that ever something that you've seen, some hemochromatosis? I've seen it. It
was one of my first patients after I graduated and I started like doing functional medicine. I'll never forget the guy. I still remember talking to him on the phone the first time, and his chief complaint was fatigue. And he thought he had adrenal fatigue. So he called and wanted to get like an adrenal salivary index test done. And I was like, okay, sure. I think that's reasonable, but also let's test you for a couple more things. And he had full blown hemochromatosis, had never been diagnosed. And he and his wife and I gave him the nickname Iron Man from that point on. And it was like when the Iron Man movies were kind of popular too. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I've seen that once, and I've seen high ferritin not related to hemochromatosis many, many times.
Yeah, right.
So it's kind of like, the most extreme version of that when it manifests that way. But yeah, he like therapeutic phlebotomy, like giving blood a couple of times a year, ended up being part of his treatment, getting that oxidative stress down. But let's go back over to what is more commonly the issue, which is iron deficiency. And let's start with why that would happen first. So as we alluded to, like gut inflammation and gut stress can do that and really mess with your absorption. And I'll also point out, like, just not eating enough iron also plays a big role. And I have seen those patients
Right.
where they're vegan or vegetarian and they think, oh, I'm going to get my iron through like spinach smoothies every day. And sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you, honest to God, need to have either some supplementation in or you need to eat some animal protein to get that iron up. And that could be a really tough conversation to have. I know that not a lot of people on those plant-based diets want to hear that, but that is something I would throw out there as well. Have you seen that too?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen that. I think that when it comes to vegetarian and vegan sources of iron, the bioavailability is so much lower.
Yeah.
So even if you were being really careful from a dietary standpoint, eating things like beans, which it would be hard if you were having gut issues, but eating things
Yeah.
like spinach and chocolate or things that have a lot of iron in them from a vegetarian vegan sources, the absorption's usually worse. The bioavailability is not as good.
Yeah.
So even if you were really paying attention to it, there's a chance that you still might not be able to get enough in. And then, like you're saying, if you have gut issues on top of that, it makes it even more challenging. So you're kind of the cards are stacked against you, so to speak. And I do think that the gut side of things as well, with iron, certain microbes can really steal iron from you in a way. They're a little bit pesky,
Mhm.
pesky thieves in the gut. So
Little buggers.
iron can be utilized by, yeah, I know. Iron can be utilized by a lot of microbes.
Yeah.
So that could be a factor in there as well. But yeah, it definitely gets tricky because it's certainly a nutrient that I think if you're not absorbing well can have a huge effect.
Yeah. And I've even, this will kind of segue into the conversation of how we increase people's iron and how we help people with this. I remember, to your point, that some microbes will use iron like to build biofilms or
Yep.
do some of their stuff. So in somebody who has really profound dysbiosis, I don't always want to go drop iron into that system, but it's like this catch 22 of like, I need you to like have the capacity to heal, you know?
Right.
And it makes me think of this one patient that I worked with. I probably worked with her like a year and a half ago. And she had ulcerative colitis. And at the time when she came to see me, she was on, I think, a biologic, a steroid suppositories. I mean, like, she was on a bunch of stuff. And we did some stool testing. She had mad dysbiosis. And as we started working on that and kind of peeling back those layers, it came up, oh, she's also iron deficient, which is not uncommon amongst that crowd. And one of the things for her, I remember telling her, like, I don't want to drop iron into your gut right now because I do wonder what would happen with that.
Right.
So instead, let's try to have you get some iron from food to the best of your ability. And I actually discovered, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there are transdermal iron patches that you can get on Amazon. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not.
It sounds wacko. I remember when I heard about it, I was like, there is no way on earth that iron is going to get absorbed through the freaking skin. Are you kidding me? But this was a situation where I was like, you're really like flary right now. I don't want to mess with
Right.
that. So just in case, and we had her do the patches only with no other real interventions because she was already eating meat. It wasn't like huge dietary shifts for her in that regard, but just working on her gut for a period of time, maybe being a little bit more mindful of iron through food and also doing the iron patches did really significantly help her iron levels. And I've seen it a couple other times where I've used those iron patches in situations like that. And they do
Yeah.
seem to help at least somewhat, which is
Oh,
pretty freaking
interesting.
wild. Yeah, it's called Patch
Yeah.
MD. I am not affiliated with the company. I earn nothing telling you that, but Patch MD, the iron patches specifically, I've had a couple of patients do surprisingly well on them.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check those out. I think that I remember, I'm not sure if I was in school when I was researching this, but I do know there's some interesting studies on like iron and IBD
Mm,
and sometimes supplementation causing more inflammation. So like what
mm,
you're saying, where it is
see,
tricky.
yeah,
So I know there's literature behind that where it sort of seems to fuel more inflammation and dysbiosis. So it does become tricky because it's like there
yeah,
is this catch 22. So doing something like a patch, it could be a good strategy, and just generally working on the inflammation first
yeah.
sometimes helps before doing anything iron wise. And I do think some of the iron supplementations that are given by like docs are like mega doses and like hard forms of iron so like you're just going to have tons of iron left over in the gut to possibly feed microbes and cause more inflammation. So I do think the form probably matters as well that you're considering, but like it just is wild, the doses and the forms that are given by more conventional docs.
I joke. I've seen the pills before, and I swear it looks like if you break them open, they're gray on the inside, right? Like it's just a tablet of like, literally it looks like somebody went to the Home Depot, took a bunch of iron filings, compressed them into a tablet, then like painted it red and called it good. And they're like, yeah, let's sell this to the public and see what happens.
Right.
And funny enough, I said that in a blog years ago, and I kid you not, like on the back end of some websites, you could see like the things that people Googled to find your website, right? Like the keywords. I don't know if you can even still do that now, but back in the day, I remember that was one of my blog posts, and somebody Googled Home Depot iron and they found my blog for that reason. And I remember thinking that person had to have been really confused when they landed on my website.
Right.
It was fantastic though when I saw that. But anyway, I think that a lot of what's available over the counter and what they give you as far as like prescription iron pretty much stinks. If you're really, really iron deficient, it's going to feel like a miracle regardless.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if you're super deficient in folate, you're going to think folic acid is pretty much the best thing ever. But is it the ideal form to take? Probably not. Like you could do a bit better than that potentially.
Right. For sure. Sure. Yeah. Again, I think like, I don't think a lot of docs too are necessarily considering if someone has iron deficiency and gut issues, they're usually like, oh, well, I can see iron deficiency and they might have IBS. It's probably going to be fine. And they'll just kind of send you on your way with a mega dose of iron that could flare things up a little bit.
Yeah. Or cause constipation.
Yeah. And it could, like to your point, help in a major way for the iron issues that you're experiencing with fatigue, malaise. But it's like at what cost? So there's like that cost benefit ratio there, but yeah, it's so tricky with.
Well, yeah, it is. Sorry to cut you off, but I was going to say that's kind of the glory of getting it through food too.
Right.
Is, if you eat a hamburger and get some iron that way, I do think that that's going to be less of an issue probably, as opposed to dropping one of those Home Depot iron filing pills into your gut and then hoping for the best. Like,
right.
To whatever extent you can, if you can get iron through food, I think that's great. And then, supplement beyond that. I have had cases before, I've worked with people, like with celiac disease, for example, or SIBO, where like they've been aware of the iron deficiency, they've been trying to work on it to no avail. And I've got a couple tricks up my sleeve for those kind of situations. I don't know if you have any as well. But what I've seen a couple times is every now and then I'll bust out the iron patches, but not typically for that sort of a case. But what I've also seen really helpful is if you space the iron supplement out every other day instead of taking it daily. I forget the exact mechanism, but your body basically puts the kibosh on your absorption after a while because your body knows that too much iron could be a bad thing and inflammatory. Yeah. So after I think it's 24 hours or so, your body starts to inhibit absorption if you've had an excess prior to that. So like if you take an iron supplement on a Monday, by the time Tuesday rolls around, your body is starting to downregulate absorption. And then if you take it every day for months or years, it's like you're not getting the most bang for your buck. So instead, what I'll have people do very frequently is take either a single dose or even a double dose and just time it every other day, so that you allow your body's absorption to kind of reset in the middle there. And then that actually works really, really well. I've also gotten a lot of mileage out of, I always forget the strain. It's whatever probiotic strain is in Jarrow's Ideal Bowel Support, I think is I'm going to Google it right now because it's going to bother me if I don't remember. It's the one, it's 299V. I can never remember what the species is, though. What the devil is this? Lactobacillus plantarum, 299V. That bacteria specifically increases iron absorption in humans.
Oh,
So I've
cool.
used that, and I'll have people take the probiotic every day, but then pulse the iron every other day, typically. And that usually works pretty well, even for resistant cases where they're not absorbing their iron very efficiently. And then, like I said, if we need to, we could slap on, an iron patch or change up the type of iron that's given.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to circle back to you talking about iron and food as well. Because I think, sometimes there is a dietary reason why you're low in iron as
Yeah.
well. Like what we were saying before, and it's not even vegans or vegetarians. Maybe you just don't eat a lot of red meat or don't eat a lot of iron just in general. And that's always going to be there if that doesn't get correct. Like it's one thing to go then replete the iron, but it might just become deficient over time the longer you're dealing with it. And so that I think is important. I think again the main thing I tend to focus in on if someone's iron deficient, there's a couple things. I think the form is important. So typically I use heme-based iron supplementation.
Yeah.
I tend to see a much bigger effect with that. Sometimes I'll have people make sure that they're taking it away from calcium. Foods that have calcium tend to bind to iron. So anytime you kind of want to separate those if you eat dairy or things that are iron or that are rich in calcium, I should say.
Or if you take an iron supplement. Like I can't touch dairy with a 10-foot pole, but I take calcium as a supplement.
Right.
Spacing that out.
Right. Yeah. So definitely spacing iron away from calcium's helpful. I also like to clue in on like periods and cycles because I tend to work. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I think that's really big, especially in the women that I work with. Because iron really, for women, if they're premenopausal and their cycles are really heavy, I mean, that's something that almost has to be fixed because that's a huge reason why you're losing a lot of iron.
It
So
can
a lot
be
of
the reason.
right,
Honestly,
right. So a lot of times I'll definitely ask about that, get some more information about that, and we'll kind of work on things that could help with that underlying cause. But yeah, that when the cycles are really heavy, and a lot of times there's reasons for that, like inflammation and gut imbalances and hormonal issues from just the stress and inflammation going on in the body. But yeah, I think getting cycles more, I'm trying to think of a good word, less heavy and more regular and normal, which is always hard. It's always funny to me too when like a doctor, asks you like, how are your cycles? Are they heavy? But it's like hard to know because you're only in your body. So you only like, have one reference point, but then you can kind of get a gauge on like how many tampons or pads you're using.
Exactly.
But it is funny, like sometimes if you're talking to someone who's had like really heavy periods for a while, like their normal's very like their reference point's very off in terms of what's like normal.
Their reality set point is like shifted in one direction.
Right, exactly. So which it makes sense. Like I said, you're only in your body, but getting a gauge on like the heaviness of your cycles and if those need to be worked on and kind of digging to the root cause of what's driving that, I think is really important when it comes to iron.
Yeah. Yep. And sometimes there's other things to look at too, like endometriosis.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, just like this world of estrogen dominance, which is totally like a whole rabbit hole we can go down another episode. But the imbalance between estrogen and progesterone or their function is really important for that. But very often, and I can think of 2 patients right off the top of my head where that became part of the conversation is like, okay, you're iron deficient. And one of the women was horridly anemic. Like I think her hemoglobin was like 6.5. It was low enough that LabCorp not only, so like if you guys see enough lab work, LabCorp, if it's bad enough, it'll flag things as low and high. And then sometimes it'll flag things as very low. And then if it's really bad, like this woman, it came back with the word alert.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It was pretty profound. I mean, that was a moment where for her, I actually called her at home that night and had her go to the hospital. This was pre-COVID, where it wasn't as risky to go to the hospital, but I actually had her go to the ER because I was like, I want to make sure that you're not like bleeding out or that you're not going to collapse on me. Like hemoglobin of 6 or 6.5 is really, really bad. They ended up telling her basically she didn't need an infusion in the moment, but they sent her to a hematologist, and then we ended up just managing it naturally anyway. But I remember that moment where I got that result back and I was like, and one of the things was that her period was very, very heavy. So we were working on like the SIBO, the constipation. She had been on a proton pump inhibitor for like 3 years, and PPIs will inhibit your absorption of iron. So there was a lot of stuff to untangle in the moment. But in that moment, I was just like, I want to make sure you're okay. Like, you need to get to the hospital now and just kind of double check some stuff. And it ended up being okay, but it was pretty scary.
Right. Like we tend to like to do things naturally, but there are times when you need like acute support.
Yeah.
No, that's crazy. I've never seen anything that low either. I'd probably be like, I would do the exact same thing. Be like, go get yourself some help. Go get yourself looked at and checked out from a conventional medical standpoint to make sure everything's okay and there's nothing major like bleeding out going on.
Well, and that's the thing is like from my perspective, part of this might have been like some deep-seated PTSD, but when my daughter was very young, I think my daughter was like 2 or 3 months old, my mom actually had an ulcer that was big enough that they called it a geyser in the ER.
Gosh.
Yeah. So she that morning, she tends to be iron deficient if she's not careful because she had a gastric bypass. She had a Roux-en-Y years ago. So that's another thing, like bariatric surgery is something that will also kind of set the stage for a lot of nutrient deficiencies, but that crowd usually is aware of that. But for her, she just, that morning, she was really tired, like more so than normal. Like she took a shower and then she laid down in bed for a while to like recover from the strenuous task of taking a shower. And she went to work, was pushing through, again, like taking that stress and just like shoving it down and not listening to the body. And she passed out and they had to call the what do you call it? The ambulance. My gosh, English language today, and I don't know. But they had to call the ambulance. She went to the ER. And I remember her hemoglobin at the time was about 6. And they did have to give her a transfusion. So I think that's why, like, when I saw that patient come back with like 6.5, I was like, oh my God, like you might actually need a transfusion. I know my mom did when she hit about 6. And sure enough, like they gave her a transfusion. They figured out what was happening. She did have the classic like coffee ground stools later, but like it set in so quickly for her because apparently the ulcer was right over an artery. So that's why it was a geyser. Yeah, it was in a location that was just perfect enough that everything just went to shit really quick. So she didn't get the coffee ground stools of the ulcer until she had already been at the ER for several hours. And then she was like, oh, yeah, that's weird. But that is a classic indication for that. But anyway, so my mom's fine now. Working on stuff always, but she's fine. But that's where I think my brain was like, oh. Right.
What's your mom's name, by the way?
Robin, although on Facebook, she goes by Nibor.
Oh, I see. I see what she did there.
Just Robin backwards. Yeah. I forget what the genesis of that decision was, but yeah, we always go back and forth, and I jokingly call her, Nibber or Nibor.
Oh.
When I'm talking to her on the phone, I'm like, hey, Nibber, what's up? She's like, no, it's Nibor. Oh. We debate the pronunciation frequently. But yeah, Robin.
I want to know because I feel like we talk about her a decent amount on this. So I just want to, if we have Robin, we can just call her by
Nibor
name.
Definitely deserves a shout out because she's the basis of a lot of my stories.
Awesome.
Yeah, so anyway, let's see. So getting off of my mom and her crazy geyser of an ulcer. Oh God, the PTSD from that. I keep telling her she has my permission to be boring for once, but I don't think she's taken me up on it quite yet. But yeah, so GI bleeds also can cause iron deficiency. These would be like the really whoa things. Right. Is like
like if you have blood in your stool, definitely get that looked out.
blood in the stool,
looked
coffee
at for.
ground stools, like that kind of stuff. I would suspect a GI bleed. If it's bright red blood, I would suspect it came from more like near the exit, and then that might be more of like a colitis kind of situation or a hemorrhoid. But if it's, you know, darker blood, certainly I would think more like upper GI bleed. Cancer sometimes will come back. One of the things that can come back with cancer is low iron, and it's a little bit of the which came first, the chicken or the egg situation, but that can happen. And then, like we said, endometriosis and like really heavy periods and that kind of presentation of just like losing blood perpetually can be a biggie for iron too. But those are all the like holy shit things. So let's get back into more like real world application for most of our listeners.
Yeah, well, I will say too that iron's really important in thyroid function as well. So sometimes if I think it could be an important factor if someone's struggling with thyroid issues to make sure the iron base is covered. So if that's something that you've had for a while, and again, a lot of the symptoms sort of commingle. So like if you're hypothyroid, you're tired, you're probably tired and have issues that are very similar to iron deficiency, but they can be kind of closely tied. You need iron for the production of hormones, the thyroid hormones. So if you're not getting enough iron, it could be like an underlying cause of hypothyroidism, or like could be at play in the equation of your hypothyroidism. So just something else of note, since a lot of the people that I know we work with struggle with thyroid issues for various reasons.
Very commonly.
Yeah.
And I would we probably should have started the episode with this, but I'll say it now anyway, is that literally nothing in the body works without oxygen.
Right.
None of it. Nothing. With the exception, okay, your microbiome actually like does better in an oxygen devoid environment, aka like the colon. But your actual tissues, everything from, you know, your toenails to your thyroid to your eyebrows to your pancreas, everything needs oxygen. And that's where I see it being a catch-22 also, is that, like, say we take SIBO, which is, I think I've said this before on this podcast, if not, I think SIBO is inherently a disorder of dysmotility above all else. Like something had to crap out your motility to get you the end result of SIBO. So motility is always on the radar of what I'm talking about with my SIBO patients. Well, guess what? Your vagus nerve, your gut-brain axis, your parietal cells, like the cells that make juices for you, the cells that regulate motility, they're not going to work if they don't have oxygen. It's kind of a deal breaker for like the whole body. So it's one of those things that like and to his credit, I will say, any practitioners who have trained at all with Datis Karazian have zero excuse for never checking iron, because he, in like all of his classes, at least that I've taken, right up front, he says, look, the deal breakers, blood sugar, oxygen. You don't have those two things and they're not stable and doing good, all shit's going to hit the fan and all hats are off. So, you know, I think he really drills that into the people that he trains, thankfully. But like nothing works. I mean, it's almost, I don't want to say it's almost useless, but it's almost like silly to talk about, you know, healing the leaky gut or treating, you know, the hormones or managing your adrenals if your whole body is starved for oxygen. And that could be really subtle. Like I usually say as an example, just as an easy to remember marker, that you want hemoglobin above 12.5 for women, probably 13.5 for men. And you want ferritin above about 50 for women of childbearing age. If you know, if you're premenopausal or postmenopausal, there's probably slightly different ranges, but generally 5.0. Whereas LabCorp won't flag you until you get down to 15, or like I said, 11.1 for hemoglobin. So there's quite a lot of room where like you are deficient to a point, or you're anemic to a point where you're going to manifest symptoms, and LabCorp and therefore your conventional doctors are probably never going to mention it to you. So.
Yeah. No, it really is. I mean, I concur with everything that you're saying. It's a biggie, and I think that again, I think it's a two-parter, because it's about replenishing a deficiency, but also ensuring that you're restoring balance in the gut, and you're restoring the ability to absorb things properly, and making sure that you're getting enough of iron in. from a dietary standpoint. Like no one wants to be on iron supplements forever. That's not our goal. And there's, again, a lot of ways to get iron in the diet. There's definitely some nutrients that I think it's harder where it might make sense to do a little bit of supplementation. Like for you, you had just mentioned calcium. If you're not eating dairy, it's a little bit trickier to get enough calcium in the diet. So there's situations like that when it makes sense. And again, maybe if you're vegan, vegetarian, and it's hard to get iron in the diet, then supplementation more long-term makes sense. But I think for most people, getting enough iron in is something that's relatively easy to do if you have the right tools and you understand where to get it from. But yeah, it does take kind of checking the boxes from that standpoint.
Yeah, and to your point, I don't know if this is what you were alluding to, but as far as like testing, the testing is dirt cheap. Like,
right,
real cheap. I mean, no doctor on planet Earth should have a problem running these tests for you, honestly. And if they do, get another doctor. But what you ideally want to do is ask for a CBC, a complete blood count, ideally with a differential, which is the white blood count part of that. But the CBC will tell you like red blood cells, hemoglobin, stuff like that. You ideally want to get ferritin, which is that long-term storage form of iron. And you also want an iron panel with TIBC. And sometimes I'll see that where like hemoglobin C, you know, the RBC seem like they are hanging in there. Ferritin is kind of hanging in there too, but I'll see people with like iron saturation at, 16. I'm like, ooh, that's right on the borderline of LabCorp caring about it. We need to start thinking about it, through food, if nothing else. So ideally you want all three of those panels. You want the CBC, which is like, are you anemic right now in this moment? Yes, no. You want the kind of middle of the road, the iron that's free floating around your bloodstream, and the TIBC. And then you also want that long-term storage form of iron. And that's going to be more of like your long-term marker of how iron replete you've been. But ideally, running all of those, I mean, even if your insurance doesn't cover it, I mean, what, that would cost like $20 maybe through like a LabCorp request.
Right,
so there's no excuse to not get it done at least once a year, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. And it, like you said, I mean, there's definitely labs that'll like ask people to go to their doctors to order where there is a little bit of pushback. I'm cough, thyroid labs.
Yeah.
Like T3 levels that docs
nobody checks
like, you don't need it. And it's like, then becomes an argument. Like what you're saying, this is just super easy. And if you ask a doctor, they shouldn't give you any trouble. And if they do, I'd probably find a different doctor.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think doing kind of periodic labs each year that just check it in on some of these things, especially if you've been deficient in the past, like that you're someone that is at risk of iron deficiency anemia. Getting it looked at and checked in on, every once in a while, I think is really good.
Yeah, I think for most people, like yearly blood work, I'm kind of a nerd. So prior to the pandemic and trying not to go out as much, I was trying to do like pretty comprehensive blood work on myself about twice a year. Now I've scaled back. I haven't done it in a while because of the pandemic, but I think at least like a yearly check-in on a bunch of stuff, like take a peek at the thyroid, take a peek at your iron, stuff like that, liver panel, whatever, is a pretty good thing to do for most people. I will say this also, and this came up like with that patient with colitis, for example, and with that patient who had the hemoglobin down in the 6s. Be mindful of how much blood work you're doing, though, if you're deficient, because the ultimate irony would be us telling you that you need to get your iron up, but then also requesting that you take blood out of your body for the sake of testing your iron. So like resist the temptation to go totally crazy on that. Like I've definitely had patients where they're like, okay, we're going to check this in a couple of weeks, right? And I'm like, no, because you need to hang on to your blood. That's the point. So usually like if somebody comes back anemic, or if they come back with low iron, I'll try to recheck it like every couple of months, like maybe every 2 or 3 months. If somebody, with this woman, for example, her hemoglobin was like 6 or something, the woman who I sent to the hospital. So for her, I was like, okay, look, from here on out, I don't want to rob you of any more blood when I send you to the phlebotomist. So for a while, we're just going to measure your CBC and nothing else. like kind of our first benchmark for her was let's get your hemoglobin above 10. And then like once we get that sort of better but still totally deficient, then maybe we could think about tacking on other nutrient markers. But like right now, I don't want to take blood from you. And there was probably about a year, honestly, that we were really just checking in on the CBC, and then we eventually graduated to checking on her ferritin. But it took a while to get
Right.
her up out of the gutter from 6.5 up to 10 or 11 something, where I felt comfortable taking more blood from her.
Right.
It was quite the road. So that's another consideration, is that when you get phlebotomy done, you're taking blood and red blood cells out of your body. And if you are already depleted, you might want to spare that and resist the temptation to do a lot of data collection that way. Or do things, stool testing or urine testing or saliva testing. Do some other testing if you feel the need to do any testing.
Right. And I do think like maybe a good point to check in on too is like knowing when supplementation is necessary versus dietary intervention. Because like if you want ferritin levels up 50 in the 50 and above range, what does that look like in terms of getting it there? I think it kind of depends on where you're falling from an iron standpoint or from a ferritin standpoint too. I think if your ferritin's 30 or and under, I think it'd be hard to get it up without supplementation. It might take a longer period of time. It also depends on how much you're probably engaging in the iron from a dietary standpoint. If you're eating things like liver and stuff that are really high in iron, it might be possible, but I'd say you're probably better off supplementing if your ferritin's under 30. If it's over 30 and you're kind of a little bit under, you could probably do it diet-wise if you're pretty diligent. So I did just want to throw that in there because I don't necessarily think everyone that's a little bit under optimal from a ferritin standpoint necessarily needs supplementation in every case. But I definitely say if you were kind of under 50 to monitor it and making sure that, levels are going up over time when you're doing things that are supposed to bring it up. And I think, again, addressing the underlying gut stuff, if that's at play, is key and pivotal too.
Yeah. And I agree. And I mentioned another scenario too, where like somebody has a normal looking CBC, relatively normal ferritin, but like their iron saturation is low or their free floating iron is low. Those are also scenarios where I'm like, okay, like, here's top 10 list of foods with iron. I have like a little handout that I'll send people in the portal, try to eat these foods and we'll talk about it next time. Versus again, like then the spectrum goes all the way down to the poor woman with 6.5 hemoglobin who I called that night and said, oh my God, go to the hospital right now.
Right.
So there's a spectrum of it. But in all my years of practice, I've only seen one case where that was the case. So most people, it's more, it's the kind of stuff that's not going to send you to the hospital. It's the kind of stuff that's going to like just drag you down chronically and be a bother and be a thing that keeps you stuck in the weeds.
Right. No, I agree. I really wish that I liked liver. How do you feel about liver? Do you like liver? Because liver is very high in iron, in case people out there didn't know, it's very high in iron.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings. I remember I was more paleo leaning when I lived in Phoenix for a while. It was like, 2012, 2013. It was like the rise of the paleo era.
Right.
And I remember a buddy of mine who I met at the paleo meetup group. Hey, Toffler, if you're listening. Toffler and I cooked pate once at her house. And I remember not loving the process of the making of it. I don't know, like something was just not ultra appealing, but the finished product was delicious.
Yeah.
And I keep kind of like every now and then I'll think about it. And I'll think I should make it again, but then like the process of making it is unappealing. So I'm like, maybe I won't ever do that again.
Right.
So I don't know. What I've heard though, word on the street, if you have a Joe that does trading in your neighborhood, I've heard that Joe has some chicken liver pate that is pretty tasty. I've never tried it because it has dairy in it, which is one of my two arch nemesis in life. But word on the street is that Trader Joe's has chicken liver pate that's pretty scrumptious for what it's worth.
Interesting. Yeah, it's so funny. I need to, and part of the problem is I feel like when I did it, I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I feel like if someone knows what they're doing with liver, it's usually probably going to taste pretty good.
Mhm.
I feel like when I tried to make it, it's so finicky. Organ
Mm.
meat is so finicky in general. So if you're trying to cook it, it can be a little tricky. But it's so funny. I was talking to my father-in-law and his fiance, and this was maybe 2 years ago. And they were going on and on because they're from Iran.
Mm.
They're going on and on about the different organ meats that they ate like as kids in Iran, and it all sounded really good, but they're all like, yeah, we ate tongue, we ate like, you know, kidneys, we ate heart. Like, they ate literally every piece of the animal growing up, and they still have a lot of good recipes for those. So like, I got all into the conversation. So I just think maybe if I can like get a good Persian recipe of some sort that can help me tolerate organ meats, but I want to like it. I just haven't liked it in the past.
New idea, new plan.
Okay,
Hashtag
new plan.
Future plans. So we were talking about this before the pandemic, that we look forward to getting together in person and doing weird and awesome things together. And we'll do like a vacay of sorts. One of the things we'll put on the itinerary is you get one of those amazing recipes. We will buy some hippy dippy, free range, organic, grass fed, moon fed, whatever cow parts. And we will make some pate and some tongue, and we'll make stuff together. And then when one of us is like, oh, the other one could be like, it's healthy, damn it. And we can like,
oh, a little pep talk.
Yeah, it'll be like the little pep talk throughout that. So that's going to be new on the list. But yes, that sounds lovely. I think we feel similarly. Why do you say tongue? Because so when I was pregnant with my daughter, so this was like 6 years ago, around this area of North Carolina, in the Triangle, there's a farm tour that they do twice a year. Probably not this year because, you know, pandemic.
Right.
But every spring and fall, all of the local farms in the area participate, and basically like you pay $20 and you can drive to any of the farms and like participate in the events for the day or whatever. And it's an opportunity to get to meet the farmers, like see the farm and hear about what they offer. And we did that the spring that I was pregnant with my daughter. And there was one place out, like kind of out in the outskirts of the boonies, that had like grass-fed beef that was amazing. And they had like 100 acres of land, and they had horses, and my mom nerded out on the horses. But they had a bunch of frozen cuts of meat that we could buy right then and there. And we like loaded up a cooler and brought it all home. And one of the things randomly that I was like, let's get an organ and I'll like cook an organ. And no, actually, I take it back. I thought it was tongue. It was a heart. I purchased a beef heart because I was like, organ meat, man, let's do it. And then did I cook it? No.
Yeah.
My husband, every now and then, like every 6 months, he would ask me, he's like, so are you going to cook the beef heart? And I'm like,
oh my gosh.
not right now. Like, it seemed really great in the moment. And then I was like, I don't know what to do with a heart.
Right. Well, one thing I have also wanted to try that would probably be easier for us to try in our little video would be, I guess, U.S. wellness meats. It's something that Chris Masterjohn always talks about. He eats like, they have liverwurst, or maybe like a liver sausage that like is a blend of like kidney, heart, tongue, like different organ meats in the blend. And apparently that's pretty good. I haven't tried it, but I'd be intrigued to try like something that was like put together nicely by someone else in like a sausage type
See,
form.
Everybody listening at home, you can see that we are normal people. We're normal Americans, and we're not overjoyed with the thought of eating organ meat like any of you are. But it can be healthy. So we're going to try. One of these days, we're going to table that. We're going to do a video or 2 or 3, and we're going to make ridiculous things in the kitchen. And it's going to be great. I think that we probably would make it and it would be really great, but it's just like getting over that mental hurdle of doing it is like, ugh.
Right.
And I didn't grow up eating the stuff. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I didn't either. And it's so interesting because I feel like a lot of the older generations that I talk to, like my grandpa was like a farm boy, and he is always like, oh, I love like liver. I love all these things. Like, so it's interesting because he just grew up eating it. Yeah. And I'm sure his mom knew how to make it really well. Because I think because it's more of a game, it's kind of a gamey meat. it's a little bit more finicky, and I'm not used to it. It's not something like we're used to eating the muscle meat, not necessarily the organ type meats. So it's just a different thing.
Spoiled.
And we are, and it takes some time to get used to.
Yeah.
But I wish I was. It'd be really funny if like I got my iron tested and my ferritin, because I tend sometimes to run a little bit low in ferritin. Not like
I was going to ask if you had ever been anemic or if you had ever been iron deficient, since we have been saying that it's very common amongst people with gut problems, and we both have had our fair share of that. So I was curious.
Right. I feel like I remember I've been in the 30s before. I don't think I've ever been like from a ferritin standpoint. I've never been in like some of the ones that I see where it's like 15 and under. I've never been in that range. Yeah. But I've definitely been on the lower end of things in the past. And you could just hold up past results and yell at me to eat the liver. Pep talk to eat the liver. You see these labs, you don't want them dipping lower than this. Yeah. And then
see, look, I've got my motivation right there.
Right. But yeah, again, it's definitely like something to like, there's been periods of my life too where I've definitely had heavier cycles. So that's something that I feel like has impacted iron levels before. And then there was also periods of times where I didn't have any cycles at all. And then my iron was fine, which again was not a positive thing. I'm not telling people, I'm not telling people to get their body so stressed out to not have periods. But I think that that's like kind of interesting, because I've definitely seen just how iron levels have fluctuated in my body based on what's going on with my cycle.
Again, it makes sense because you are losing blood, perhaps a copious amount, depending how heavy your cycle is. So it can be a pretty big deal breaker.
Yeah, for sure.
In retrospect, I'm kind of glad. So like my hormones were all sorts of squirrely when I was a teenager. Like I got my period pretty late. I think I was 14 when I got my first period. And then I was one of those girls that like I would get 2 periods a year.
Yeah.
But they were horrible. They would be like 2-week, moderately heavy periods, what I thought was heavy at the time. And it would just be like the worst ever. And I was one of those girls that at 17, 18, they were like, oh, that's not good. Here's the birth control pill. This'll fix it. Side note, didn't fix anything.
Right.
But it tricked my body into bleeding once a month like a normal human. But in retrospect, that was the point in my life, because I think I've told you, right, that I'm a recovered vegetarian.
Yep.
Between the ages of about 11 and 22 or 23, I was a vegetarian. And that was in that time frame, right? And it makes me think, oh, maybe a part of that was that my body was trying to like preserve my iron storage.
Yeah.
Like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have a period every month right now, guys, because we're always deficient in iron. So in retrospect, maybe the body was smart enough to know that.
Yeah. No, I think like I definitely had some weird cycles, and it's probably because I was just so active. Like I played so many sports all year round, and like
that was not my problem.
Well, depending on the sport too, because like when I ran cross country, I wasn't having cycles. And when I played basketball, they'd kind of start to come back, but like would be hit or miss depending on where I was. And then when I played softball, it's kind of a lower key sport, so things would be fine during those. So it'd be like cyclically off depending on what sport I was playing and the intensity of it. It's funny. I feel like my body when I played softball was like, oh, this feels nice. We can bleed again, Yeah. But it's one of my biggest complaints, actually, which is a little off topic, how flippant doctors are when there's a lot of girls going through puberty about not having their cycles. Oh, like you're just active. Like there's no other conversation around it. But
and I don't remember the conversation with me too, because like I said, I had like 2 periods a year for several years.
Yeah.
I remember in the beginning there was a conversation of like, oh, your body is like getting used to it, this is still new and like your body's figuring it out. But in retrospect, after like a year of that, probably something was up, but I don't know. Yeah, I look back at that and I wonder now, like, I wonder if I had a touch of PCOS or if it was, blood sugar. I kind of speculate what it was all related to, but I can tell you with a great deal of certainty that the birth control pill fixed nothing. And then it wasn't until I got into studying functional medicine that again, it was Dietitian. I've had so many epiphanies because of him. I was sitting in his mastering functional endocrinology seminar, I think it was, back in the day. And again, like sitting there and he's talking about, yeah, you'll see these women who have been on birth control pills for like 7 years and it's crazy and they're deficient in everything and it's doing XYZ to their bodies. And here I am in the audience and I'm like, I've been on birth control pills for 7 or 8 years at this point. So I was like,
Yeah.
And, I kind of left that seminar feeling a bit paranoid and thinking I'm doomed. And then I figured stuff out, but yes, there's been a lot of those moments. Dietitian has probably seen my eyes bug out of my head in seminars more times than anybody else because I'm just like,
right. He probably just knows you. Yeah, he probably just knows that you're the one with the eyes bugging out.
And who steals chocolate, right? Scarfing up all that dopamine from the table with my friend.
Right.
No shame.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I feel like there was something else I wanted to add about iron, and now I cannot for the life of me think about it. So we talked about testing a bit. We talked about the things that will cause iron depletion. Side note, we mentioned already that heme iron is the way to go. So if you can get that through food, that's great. If not, there are actually heme iron supplements available on the market that are pretty great. My only beef is the one that I'm familiar with, at least, has a lot of junk and like filler and color kind of crap in it.
Is yours I think they have a new version that's cleaner.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
I think it's called, I just recently saw it. There's another one too that I like, but it also has a lot of B12 and folate in it as well. Like I wish it was just the iron because like
I hate that.
Some people are doing like a B complex or something and it's just too much. So depending on the client, I'll use sometimes that one, but it seems a little bit cleaner than the Proferin. But just recently I figured out that Proferin has a newer version. I'll send it to you. I think it's called like Proferin Clean or something like that. Which makes me think like who would buy the Proferin
dirty? Yeah,
it's like I don't know, but it's I forget what it's called, or maybe Clear, Proferin Clear, something like that. Okay. But it's I think it's a little bit cleaner. I don't think it has the dyes and stuff.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that because I have been hesitant to use it a lot in my patients because of that. But I'll usually either use that or like iron bisglycinate. Sometimes I'll use it. It works reasonably well. But what I was going to say is that another trick, now granted, we're both advocating getting heme iron when you can, but if you're really being stubborn about it, honestly, and you're like, no, I'm not eating burger, I'm not eating the heme iron supplements, no way, no how. If you're going to take a vegan or vegetarian source of iron, if you could pair it with vitamin C, that does help with the absorption a bit. Again, I don't know if that's going to be as good as the heme iron, to be quite honest. And again, as somebody who was a vegetarian for 12 years, during that time, I was anemic on and off quite a bit, side note. And I have never struggled with it since reintroducing meat. But that is something to keep in mind, is that if you pair it with some vitamin C or some vitamin C rich foods, that might help with the absorption a bit. So that's worth considering as well.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I don't necessarily know if I have anything to add. That's a good point. I think making sure you're getting vitamin C and iron together if you're doing a plant-based source.
Yeah. And I will share another kind of side note, and I think we're starting to run out of things to talk about with iron, although I don't know, I feel like this was a lot of stuff anyway. I was iron deficient anemic in, like high schoolish age, like when I was vegetarian for a lot of years. And honestly, I wasn't being super careful with my intake. Like those were back in the days when I would have like Pop-Tarts and who knows what else. So
I was a Pop-Tart girl too. It was like my favorite breakfast.
They weren't my favorites, My favorite was if mom and dad like sprang for the toaster strudels.
Oh my gosh, I love toaster strudels.
Ooh,
Except the you did
those.
you just use one pack of the like sometimes
I mean,
I'd
you.
steal two packs of the icing.
I mean,
And
you
then
have to. Well, I say this as an only child. If I did use two on like a Tuesday, I'm just screwing over myself on a Wednesday, right? Like,
right,
because
right.
then I'm going to be the one eating it probably. But yeah, toaster strudels were the best. Pop Tarts were a reasonable runner-up for sure. But I was a person who like skipped breakfast a lot. Like I said, my mom would
Me
throw a
too.
granola bar and beg me like, eat this on the bus, please. And I would save it until like first period and scarf it at my locker.
Hmm.
Um, so probably no digestive juices were had in that moment. And I did that very chronically. But another cringeworthy moment, my go-to cafeteria lunch of choice in high school. Do you want to wager what it was?
I want to hear about it, but I don't know if I
It's
want to
not that
give a
glamorous.
guess.
Mozzarella sticks. End of list. That was my
Oh my
lunch.
gosh, you know what my lunch was?
Huh.
Our cafeteria had really good peanut butter and jelly. Like they would, it sounds really strange, but like the bread they used was like the perfect thickness. They used the perfect like
Try not to
ratio.
judge you.
They used the perfect ratio of peanut butter to or to jelly. Like the ratio was so on point. And then they put it in this little refrigerator. So it like got like some crispness in the refrigerator. I don't know what it was, but everyone will rave about these peanut butter and jellies from my high school.
If you went to high school with Amy, you comment down below.
Right.
I'm very perplexed. Um, what could be so special? Have you ever seen the Good Place?
I have not.
Okay, first of all, one of my
I
favorite
know of
shows.
it. My husband watches it with
Okay,
like Kristen Bell,
so
right?
good. Yeah, Kristen Bell is like my favorite human ever. Anyway, but it's so good. But there's a moment. Anybody who's seen the show, you're basic. Like, you're basic, Michael. That's all I can think of when you're describing this peanut butter and jelly. Like it's peanut
It's
butter and jelly.
it's basic. I'm telling you, it's basic. I'd do that and I'd pair it with a blue Powerade and Lay's baked potato chips. So no
How
wonder
far
I
would
had
you
gut
go?
issues. Right, right.
Well, for mine, I look back and I chuckle because I'm like, as an adult, now I know celiac disease, and also I think, honest to God, I think I was dairy intolerant from birth practically,
Hmm.
and I think the gluten celiac thing set in at a later age. But looking back, I'm like, oh, so I had literally breaded dairy for my lunch multiple times per week for years of my adolescence. That was my entire lunch, was just an order of mozzarella, and it was like $3.50.
Oh
First of all,
my
they were,
gosh.
but it was enough and it was scrumptious. So that was my go-to cafeteria lunch for many, many years.
Wow.
Occasionally pizza, occasionally something else, but
I had,
usually mozzarella sticks.
I had pizza occasionally. They had hot pretzels. Those are pretty
Oh,
good.
my cafeteria did too. What is with cafeterias as a side note? Like, oh, I dread the day my 5-year-old goes to like public school and she gets access to this stuff because she's just going to have a freaking field day. We're going to be the hippy dippy parents who are like, take your apple slices and carrot sticks.
Well, I know.
It'll be
I
great.
just remember too, when I was in high school, Michelle Obama was doing like a lot of her like she had like a lot of policies on cutting back sugar in school. So like all the soda machines went away.
Hmm.
Like a lot of the cookies were going like people were up in arms. Like my friends were like, "Thanks, Michelle Obama. We don't have cookies. We don't have Coke." Like I
You
just
also don't have
remember
diabetes, children.
right. I just remember it being like us being really dramatic about it. Like, I can't believe they're taking our cookies. They're taking everything that we enjoy. It was just so dramatic. It was
That's funny.
hilarious.
Yeah, I guess this is showing our bit of an age gap. You're a youngin. I don't. I graduated high school in 2004, so that was smack dab in the Bush era of things.
Right.
So I didn't have that ability. But in my defense, I didn't eat sugar at lunch hardly. I had fat, gluten, and dairy. So there was that. So I had
Right.
deep fried
You didn't
gluten and
care.
dairy for my lunch.
Right. Right.
But anyway, looking back now, that being said, so hardly ever eating breakfast. If I did, it was a granola bar that my mom literally threw at me as I went out the door late for the bus every day of my life. And then lunch was frequently mozzarella sticks. And then dinner, I mean, like standard American stuff. I'm not surprised I was deficient in iron. And also being a vegetarian for all those years, I'm not surprised. What was more exciting that I wanted to tell you about, I had anemia of inflammation.
Oh, look out.
So I'm trying to think of the exact timing, but it was when I was in chiropractic school. It was in grad school, so I was studying functional medicine. And again, like, you know, it taught me to be more like proactive about certain elements of my health. So my friends and I who were studying functional medicine, we would like once or twice a year, we would go use direct labs and order a bunch of stuff for like $200-300, and then we would go get our blood drawn. And it was great because we didn't have licenses yet. We couldn't order anything on our own, but you could use direct labs without a physician's note and just waltz in and get your blood drawn. And there was a time or two in that span of time that I had like low hemoglobin red blood cells, hematocrit, like low or low normal, you know, MCB, MCH, MCHC kind of stuff. But my iron levels were fine. And I remember like learning in the blood chem seminars with Karazian and learning about iron of inflammation. And I'm like, okay, like what the hell's going on? And you know what finally resolved it?
What?
Treating my 2 parasites.
Oh my gosh.
You
Look
know,
out.
from the creek.
Right, from the creek water.
I mean, I think. But yeah, it wasn't. So I was doing stuff, trying to be proactive to a point, but also on a budget, a student. Like I was like, no, I'm not going to do like a $300 stool test. So I just kind of held out on that until basically right around when I graduated. I was like, I can't function like this. Like I'm having diarrhea all the time. I'm bloating. Like I need to get my act together. So I shelled out a few $100, or maybe it's closer to 1,000. I don't know. But I did a bunch of testing. I did a adrenal salivary index, which we'll talk about on another podcast episode another day. And I did stool testing, and that was the stool test that identified that I had bacterial overgrowth, H. pylori, candida, and not 1 but 2 parasites. And it was working on that dysbiosis instead of just perpetually healing my leaky gut, healing my leaky gut, healing my leaky gut, which I did for 2 years. That helps me shift gears and realize, oh, I need to work on the dysbiosis and like do probiotics and kill the bad stuff. And that it was after that now I've never tested anemic or iron deficient since then. But there was a couple of points where I had that anemia of inflammation, and I was like, what's going on?
Right.
I probably, you know, SIBO, who knows what else.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you brought up H. pylori too. That was going on in your case, because I definitely think anything that's affecting the stomach acid would probably have a big effect on iron absorption. Exactly. So I think that's an interesting one too. Like if H. pylori is a factor, looking at iron levels might be an interesting. Obviously, correcting the H. pylori would probably help resolve some of the iron issues, but it might be interesting to get a gauge if you do have something like H. pylori or anything lowering stomach acid levels, like PPIs you had mentioned earlier.
Huge.
Yeah, it might be a good idea to get a gauge on what's going on from a ferritin or iron standpoint.
Yep. All right. Well, I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm officially out of things to talk about when it comes to iron. And we touched on another type of anemia. We'll have to touch on others like B vitamin deficiency anemias later on. They are far less common though. It really, iron deficiency anemia is the number one, followed by all of the others. So if you're going to watch out for one, it's going to be this one. So yeah, I think that's about a wrap. Guys, as always, thank you for tuning in. If you are listening to us on a podcasting app, if you could rate us 5 stars, share with all your friends, share with all your neighbors, that would help us reach more people. And if you are on YouTube, if you could click like, hit the bell, subscribe, comment down below, etc. Share this link with all your friends, then that will help us heal the world of IBS and SIBO and just get a lot of these topics out in the open where they need to be discussed and get this information to the people who need it the most. So thank you as always, and we will see you in the next episode.